G'day, it's Rob here again. Well, as you would have seen in the last video, I'm working on the old 860 GT Ducati, tizzing her up a bit and getting her back on the road. Been standing for a while. And I did those rear foot peg centres, they're stainless and they turned out good. So now I'm moving on to another little job, which is the oil filler plug. It hasn't got the right sort of plug in there, so I'm going to do something about that, and I'll show you where I'm headed with that. Okay, so here's the oil filler plug. And that's not really an oil filler plug, that's the oil filler spot, but that plug is a blanking plug that they use for blocking off the end of the crankshaft oil gallery on the clutch side, and but they will fit, and a lot of people put those in because the original dipsticks get chewed out, dipstick units get chewed out, and so I'm going to make up something to replace this. That's just a 22 by 1.5mm thread, so you know, I thought, I mean, that's bronze, the original ones are aluminium. You can't use steel because, I mean, as the engine heats up, the aluminium will expand more than the steel, so you've got to keep the coefficient of expansion similar, otherwise it will just come loose, or it could come loose quite easily when the motor heats up. So you've got to use aluminium or bronze in this case. Of course, bronze is a bit beyond what I can cast, so I'll show you what I've tried to do, and yeah, move along. To do this, simply I thought, well, why not just cast it in a steel mould? So I got an old socket, 22mm socket, and then I machined up a plug to go in to block off the centre. So that's basically forming the top of the plug. And then I got an old pulley setter and machined that up so that it drops on top. And there you have the mould. Just pour molten aluminium in, let it cool. The aluminium will contract more than the steel, and it will just basically fall out. If it doesn't, you can pull the mould apart and get it out and knock it out from the bottom on the pin. So in practice I didn't have to do that. When it cooled down, it just fell out of the mould. So yeah, I'll show you how well it worked. So how good did it work? Well, it worked pretty damn well. Here's the outcome. So that is basically come out of there. Pretty neat. So I was pretty pleased with that, and it just fell out of the mould no problem. So I made that one. And I made all these little brothers and sisters as well, so that if my machining goes haywire, I'll move on to the next one. So as you can see, these all turned out pretty bloody well, you know, not bad for a home effort. Now, yeah, this one here is one I've already tried to machine, so we'll move in on that and you can see what the problem is. Right, so this is how it's supposed to look when it's finished. Pretty nifty, eh? But the thread is the problem. I plunge cut the thread, which I normally do, okay, but on die cast aluminium, plunge cutting, you know, work too well, and so I'll have to do the angled top slide trick, and I did some experimenting, and that looks like it should do the job okay on this aluminium. I mean, this is die cast, you know, it's not the stock you would buy from the shop, so it's trickier to machine for sure. But yeah, you know, if this works out, well, that'll just screw in, and then I might even machine the top back get the profile probably half that length, doesn't need to be as long as that, and then that's basically what you would buy if you bought one off the internet, and you'd be looking at anywhere from, you know, 70 to $100. It's big money. So anyway, I've got plenty to play with, and as a casting exercise it was pretty simple, but the thread is the problem. That's not good enough, it has to be better than that. And so what next? Well, I was doing some experimental threading on the lathe, and yes, we had a problem. So here's the Chinese wonder machine that gets to do everything that's going. Yeah, the poor old thing. It's really had a hammering, this. And the other day I was machining, and the reverse tumbler here, I went into the other direction, started up the lathe, and it didn't drive. Instead of shutting the lathe down, I just, stupid me, I tapped the lever thinking, oh, it's not quite into gear, but the brain wasn't switched on, and of course the thing's going, and it chipped a few teeth on one of the reverse tumbler gears, which I've already replaced twice before, where I've knocked teeth off, changing gears, a bit rough and ready. So anyway, a slap on the wrist for Rob. So now, anyway, it chipped a few teeth, but I think it wasn't bad enough that it wouldn't drive, so, you know, we moved on, we carried on, until today when I want to do threading. Well, I'm partway through the threading experimenting, and all of a sudden she's not working. We'll have a look and see what's happened. Looking in the side here and the change gears, you can see there's a problem. This gear's turning, but the train's not turning, because this is the one I chipped, and once it jumped that tooth, it took the top off all the other teeth as well. So now she's not working. When I made that gear originally, because this was replaced, this has been replaced twice. The original cast one snapped off a tooth when I was doing some really, really heavy milling. The backlash through the spindle was enough to, it was pretty severe, I tell you. And it chipped the tooth off. And then I made another replacement out of cast iron, and I chipped another tooth off that when I changed gears before the thing had stopped. I mean, this thing's done a lot of work, and I don't hang around. So I made this one up out of die-cast aluminium, and it's been going for years, and anyway, she's not going anymore, so I'll have to make another one. So what I'll do is I'll make one out of brass. I made this one out of brass. Sorry, I used a brass blank on this one, which I purchased and cut the teeth on. But I have got a big stick of brass, so I'll show you what I've got, and yeah, I think the diameter, pretty sure the diameter is big enough to do a 72 tooth gear, which that is. Well, wouldn't you know it, the brass round stock is too small by a couple of mil. This cast aluminium that I did in a baked bean tin, I think, or something like that, that's also just a tiny bit too small. This big slug is way too big, so I'll have to cast up another round stock of aluminium for the gear, and then slice one off and then cut the gear. So that's it for now. It looks like next job will be gear cutting, and on the lathe once again. Everything gets done on a poor old lathe. But anyway, you have these moments, and I mean, it does at least remind you that this is exactly why man invented beer. And yeah, well, I'm going to go and have one right now, and maybe have a bite of lunch as well. So okay, that's it for me. Yeah, great day. See you next time. Cheers.